all I know is I saw the gravity shift, okay? If you were at MTV or around MTV, 1997, 98, suddenly they decided rock was out.
Right.
When rock was still very, very high up in the thing. And it was replaced by rap.
Was a part of a long line of stewards that kept white America grounded and, dare I say, humble? Was he one of the last bastions of the type of subcultures that kept mainstream white America from dipping its toes into the weird supremacy edgelordship that we see playing out right now?
There's a whole generation of white boys who picked up DJ equipment when they should have been picking up guitars, and that's why we have this incel problem. But y'all not ready for that conversation.
Is probably the most dominant ticket selling thing in the Western world, and yet there's almost no representation of rock in culture.
White boys need to go back to making whatever the hell this genre is, because music as a whole misses the genre of new metal.
Their standards and practices immediately shifted.
Right.
So now that things that weren't allowed were suddenly allowed, people were waving guns. Okay, I think they purposely dialed down the ability of rock stars to have a voice in the culture.
Okay, so I've been hearing this discourse around rock music and this very specific framing surrounding its popularity, or lack thereof, for a while now, usually in jest or like a joke, looking to rebuild or further explore the foregone era of the litany of white boys in garages, driven to make art together, take their act on the road, and speak truth to power in a way that agitated white America and spoke to the disaffected white youth. And my problem with that is, that era never really existed. We, as folks who see things in hindsight, like to project our cultural individualistic biases into how things are played out in the past. And put plainly, we like easy answers to broader social problems. First things first, this is no shade to my contemporaries or folks who've kind of explored this issue in the past. More or less, it's additive, or me just like trying to bring more to the conversation. But where should we start? Well, almost a month ago, Billy Corgan, 90s disaffected rock icon, said this.
Okay, if you were at MTV or around MTV, 1997, 98, suddenly they decided rock was out.
Right.
When rock was still very, very high up in the thing. And it was replaced by rap.
Right.
They immediately changed the way their standards and practices immediately shifted.
Right.
So now that things that weren't allowed were suddenly allowed, people were waving guns. Okay. So some people assert that the CIA was involved in all that, again, above my pay grade, but I saw it happen. I did witness it happen.
While anyone in tune with what a microaggression is can sense a strong level of coded anti-blackness or outright racism in Corgan's comments,
people were waving guns.
Be it an exaggeration, mainly because the waving guns in hip-hop videos thing doesn't even really align with what subgenre of hip-hop was indeed popular at the time. And this might be Billy Corgan letting his racist mask slip, as he inherently thinks rap music, and by extension black people, are inherently violent. This statement actively clashes with the reality that within 1996 or 97, to about like the mid-2000s, hip-hop was in the era of extravagance, where mainstream rappers are usually showcasing their luxurious lifestyles, allegiance to moneyed high-end brands, and praising themselves for their industrious efforts in relation to the trauma that they experienced while growing up in poverty. But with that, Corgan does have a point. Rock music within our cultural mainstream has fallen off. So what exactly happened? Is there an Eminem-sized hole in white America? Did the CIA actively work to dial rock down in the culture? Personally, I don't really think so. I think these issues, in relation to how our economic system functions, has more to do with this cultural stagnation. And as a black person who plays in a rock band, I feel like I can use this space to go over all of the nuances of this conversation. Mainly the endless pit that is white people and their, let's say, lack of a creative cultural identity. It's a lot, and I'm gonna try to not go too deep into the weeds on everything, but to fully contextualize this, we gotta go back to how it started. Alright, so early rock and roll basically was a combination of other musical styles created by and popularized by black Americans, taking parts of boogie woogie, the blues, jazz, gospel, Afro-Caribbean, and other things from the diaspora. It originally existed in a communal framework, meaning that this is as much a social asset as it was an entertainment avenue. So at this time, songs were shared. kinda. And because recorded music was in its infancy, also kinda, bands mainly existed to play a collection of songs to get the people dancing. This good-spirited and loosely anti-capitalist framework had both black and white musicians sharing each other's songs, and at times, between black and Jewish Americans sharing and redoing each other's songs and compositions, or arrangements. There were problems with song stealing though. Now I wouldn't say Elvis and him popularizing the song Hound Dog, a song covered hella times, written by 2 white teenagers and originally recorded by Willa Mae, better known as Big Mama Thornton, is what started the shady tradition of white artists stealing the spotlight from black artists by doing a Timu impression of their performances. That had already happened with jazz a few decades prior. But Elvis and others at the time were able to use communal aspects of this shift within the songwriting game and ownership to make a shit ton of money and parlay their popularity into movies and other forms of media. Even with that, it was Fats Domino and many other black acts had led the charge in desegregating the dance floor, opening up the market for rock music to become big business in the first place. Even Elvis had to admit this.
And a guy that was a kind of an inspiration to me when I started out in the business, I could say hello to Fats Domino. Fats, what? Yeah.
And I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Cleveland is one of the first cities, I believe, that played what were called race records on the radio. Basically, race records were just records by black artists. Cleveland DJ Alan Freed made R&B records, you know, what they used to call rock records and, once again, race records, the mainstay of his show, The Moondog House. The radio show grew in popularity, so much so that it led to probably one of the first rock and roll arena shows in rock history. This rise in notoriety allowed Freed to do a bigger and better radio show in NYC, building larger exposure to black rock musicians, which in turn made it easier for those musicians to tour the UK and the EU, as those records were growing in popularity with the young people there as well. Now I know what you're thinking at this point. What does this have to do with Billy Corgan and rock music falling off? This is not a tangent or unimportant to this decline, because this broadening of the rock and roll market made it possible for Little Richard to do a residency in Hamburg, Germany, after a small hiatus. And it was here in 1962 for 14 shows where a band from Liverpool would change how we listen to and talk about rock music going forward.
And, you know, it reminds me when the Beatles, before Beatles, us.
From Liverpool?
Yeah, we are from Liverpool. We used to play those dark clubs in Hamburg. Remember that, Paul?
Of course I do. I booked them. I'm the leader of the Beatles.
Yes, for the Beatles, who would go on to become the de facto white faces on what rock bands look like, this Hamburg residency was their biggest break yet, following a tour that they did with Roy Orbison and Del Shannon. Little Richard had, in the band's infancy, helped provide the blueprint for how Lennon and McCartney would come up with and craft their earlier songs. And their ability to replicate the R&B sounds at the time landed them a record deal with Parlophone, I think that's how you say that. So when the British invasion hit the States, what we actually saw was the generation of kids, usually doing their best R&B impressions, which did indeed hit with the white audiences because they got their sexy rock and roll without the racial tension. According to rock journalists both past and present, the Beatles brought a more expansive, experimental, and conceptual taste to rock music altogether, with them leaning more into the LP or album as a full experience instead of a collection of singles. Well, that's what music media and the Recording Academy would like you to think. I'm not here to beat up on the Beatles. I personally don't think that they're the most important thing to ever happen to recorded music, but they had some great records and contributed a lot to the history of recorded music, if it was them playing.
Of the Beatles. Oh shit, that they were the worst musicians in the motherfucking world. They were no playing motherfuckers. Paul was the worst bass player I ever heard. And Ringo, don't even talk about it. I remember once we were in the studio with George, Martin, and Ringo had taken 3 hours for a full bar thing. He was trying to fix on a song. Goddamn, he couldn't get it. We said, mate, why? Why'd you say mate? Mate, why don't you get some lager and lime, some shepherd's pie, and take an hour and a half and relax a little bit. Ooh. So he did, and we called Ronnie Varell, a jazz drummer. Ronnie came in for 15 minutes and tore it up. Ringo comes back and says, George, can you play it back for me one more time? So George did, and Ringo says, that didn't sound so bad. And I said, yeah, motherfucker, because it ain't you. Great guy, though.
But to this Beatles glaze directly, the concept album wasn't really that new. Or writing longer, more conceptual songs wasn't really a new thing when the Beatles decided to do it in the late 60s. The long, epic, deeply arranged multi-part song was a staple of the master arrangers of the previous decade. And although these were mainly reserved for a fuller live show experience, there were longer multi-section songs that ended up on albums. You can point to Ray Charles's How Long Blues as a slow build, hold your partner dance track, which ended up on a record in the late 50s, I believe. Or his classic dance track, What I'd Say, Part 1 and 2, not to mention similar songs from James Brown at the time, in which the songs were longer because they were expected to be played to make people dance. We could also mention Centerman from Nina Simone's Pastel Blues, a 10-minute spiritual that both transcends its recorded nature by using the room as an instrument in the song with its many sections. Stand, the album by Sly and the Family Stone, an album that weaves together infectious pop songwriting, assertive cultural commentary, along with psychedelic jam sessions, with a level of cohesion and energy unseen at the time. Obviously, the work of Jimi Hendrix, who also expanded the possibilities of guitar playing, along with building a varied and experimental discography in less than 4 years. You could also mention the early work of an Isaac Hayes or Shuggie Otis, or What's Going On by Marvin Gaye that hit the early 70s. Again, sorry for the rant, but from my perspective, it seems like everyone was popping off during this time. But by the looks of it, you think that the Beatles and later Pink Floyd by themselves reinvented what the album experience was. And one might be asking why that is. And was this intentional?
In a wide-ranging New York Times interview published Friday, Wenner was asked why no women were included in his list.
It's not that they're inarticulate, although you go and have a deep conversation with Grace Slick or Janice. Please be my guest. You know, Joni was not a philosopher of rock and roll. She didn't, in my mind, meet that test.
He spoke similarly about black artists.
Black artists, I mean, Stevie Wonder, incredibly, they're genius, right? These are genius artists. I mean, I suppose when you use a word as broad as the Masters, fault is using that word, but maybe Marvin Gaye. I could cut Curtis Mayfield, they just didn't articulate at that level.
During the 30-minute interview, Wenner did acknowledge he would face criticism, but didn't backtrack.
Just for public relations' sake, maybe I should have gone and found one black and one woman artist to include here that didn't measure up to that same historical standards, just to avert this kind of criticism.
That was Rolling Stone magazine and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame co-founder Jann Wenner during a 2023 press run for his book, The Masters. He really called it that. A conversation with Dylan, Lennon, Jagger, Townsend, Garcia, Bono, and Springsteen. Yes, those are 7 white dudes. And when asked why he didn't, include women or black people, he was like, I don't know. They're not articulate enough on the intellectual level. Not a strange thing to say at all. Kind of weird to simply imply that women and quote unquote the blacks aren't smart enough to talk to for your little book or whatever. Also illuminating that the person who founded these rock institutions just doesn't believe in including black folks and women in his compendium of master craftsmen. So why am I showing you this? Well, to contextualize how history is indeed crafted. When we're thinking about who's the most important in music history, why so much stock is put into telling stories a certain way, so much weight is put into intellectualizing some figures and not others. Not to be the too woke friend, but we clearly understand who shapes how we see society, how our media shapes a narrative, changes the values of our transgressive heroes, or turns our freedom fighters into enemies of peace. The same happened with the Beatles. Were their cultural impacts overblown by the media? I'd say both yes and no. It's something a little bit more uncomfortable than that. Shout out to Alexander Avila, but what the Beatles did do for the white rock intelligentsia was incorporate classic European compositional sensibilities into the rock ethos, changing the cultural sensibilities to that closer to the Western musical tradition. Or, put simply, making rock white people music. As this culture and art occurred, the music journalists of said culture, the ones who can afford to borrow $7,000 to start their magazine covering the newish art form, can project their politics, priorities, and biases into that coverage. Rock music is no longer the lowbrow dance music of the black man, looking to pollute the youth with its demonic gyrations of the hips. It's now akin to the classic German composers of yesteryear. The Beatles are redefining how we're listening to music. Never mind that other artists doing the exact same thing around the exact same time. And I feel like this distinction, separating rock from its dance-focused cultural roots, that we can understand how rock music was quote-unquote intellectualized. It is often said that history is written by the victors, but in the case of pop music, that is rarely true. The victors tend to be out dancing, while the historians sit at their desk, assiduously chronicling music they cannot hear on the mainstream radio. And it's not just historians. The people who choose to write about popular music, even while it is happening, tend to be far from the average consumers and partygoers, and often despise the taste and behaviors of their more cheerful and numerous peers. The Beatles and their peers had expanded rock beyond anything its previous practitioners had imagined. In the process, though, they had their audience off the dance floor, separating rock from its rhythmic and cultural roots. And that change split American popular music in two. When similar splits happened in the past, the demanding of satisfying live audiences had always forced the streams back together. But by the end of the 1960s, live performances had lost their defining role in the pop scene. So with these new frames with which we can see how the demographics and to an extent the audiences have changed for rock music, doing the passive resegregation work via genre, and by effect, Sly and the Family Stone, Stevie Wonder and Motown, Curtis Mayfield, Nina Simone, they're no longer a part of the rock music conversation. They're soul artists, or R&B, or funk, or urban contemporary, even though that genre isn't static.
On one side, I'm very grateful that what I made could just be, acknowledged in a world like this. But also, it sucks that whenever we, and I mean guys that look like me, do anything that's genre bending or that's anything, they always put it in a rap or urban category, which is, and I don't like that urban word. It's just a politically correct way to say the N-word to me. So when I hear that, I'm just like, why can't we just be in pop? Why can't it just, you know what I mean? So I felt like half of me feels like the rap nomination was a backhanded compliment. Like, oh, my little cousin wants to play the game. Let's give him the unplugged controller so he could shut up and feel good about it.
And with these new genre conventions, white boys can finally have fun.
You know, I did this because I felt like to set myself aside and make myself different, maybe it would just come to me.
What is it?
No, that's not it.
All right, so that lays the basic groundwork for how rock music became a genre dominated by white men, and for the next few decades, flourished. The 70s brought more cultural tension with the popularization of disco music. Now, one would try to paint this divide amongst the rock fans, who are sensible young men who liked the deep and complex album-oriented songs of Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Yes, or Genesis, as a fight against the mass commercialization of dance slop, a battle against the corporate trash filling up the radios. But that's far from the truth. And to be honest, it was kind of in the middle. Sure, like with any genre popularized, you get a decent amount of mid, attempting to capitalize off of the current sound or trend. One could say that that's what the British invasion was. And to that point, there was a lot of boring and self-indulgent rock music that came out in the 70s. But yeah, back to the cultural tension. With rock music leaning more into a self-important, album-oriented, intellectual space, and with the segregations of the genres, soul and funk thrived on the dance floor, as well as continued to contribute to the social dance culture that provided a safe space for Black and brown folks and queer people. Why is this important? Well, one could say that they prefer the aforementioned white male bands based on how complex their music is or whatever. It can be kind of hard to take them seriously when artists like Earth, Wind & Fire, Ike and Tina, Funkadelic, Stevie Wonder, Isaac Hayes, Chaka Khan, and the Isley Brothers were releasing what one would call rock records. I wonder what the difference between these two groups are. So not only were these Black acts participating in the original functionality of the rock and roll space, getting people on the dance floor, writing good songs, challenging the limits of the recording arts, and putting together a great live show, they were not only assigned a new level of deviance for their presentation or how they dressed, but now embroiled in the culture war.
As disco went mainstream, its rejection often carried hostile, homophobic, and racist undertones. The slogan "Disco Sucks" was often an attack on the culture and the demographics the music celebrated. By rejecting disco, many rock fans were asserting a territorial claim over popular culture based on traditional, often conservative, masculine norms. For the core rock audience, the jeans and t-shirt crowd, disco demanded a style of movement and dress that felt fundamentally threatening to their identity. The disco floor required finesse, precision, and flamboyance, which stood in stark contrast to the simple, communal headbanging and casual rebellion associated with hard rock and AOR. The backlash was, in part, a cultural defense mechanism against perceived emasculation and a loss of cultural primacy.
Add to that, the 70s also gave us an era of swagged out soulful white boys who were allowed to make soul music only for it to be somehow shoved back into the rock genre under another name. It's not funk, R&B, no, it's yacht rock or soft rock. You have the Doobie Brothers, namely Michael McDonald, Bobby Caldwell, Steely Dan, Kenny Loggins, artists that I admittedly really like. And this is no shade against them, just highlighting how amorphous or passively racialized the concept of genre is. But all in all, the 70s were an interesting decade because there was so much culture happening in the streets and with music overall. The grandiosity and self-importance of the Arena Rock Act birthed the punk movement, where youth counterculture moved to play faster, looser, less manicured, in opposition to the bloated and stale rock culture that came up before them.
Again, faster! This is crazy, Dewey. Ain't nobody gonna listen to music like this. You're standing there playing as fast as you can, singing like some sort of punk.
While many aspire to root punk in a cohesive political designation with a certain set of values and principles, by and large its political messaging was undercut by the misogyny and racism of these male-dominated spaces, with the anti-establishment messaging working as a space for the bros to just get out their aggression, and not for them to build sustainable communities and movements. But sure, some anarchist sects and communist blocs were born from these scenes. And even big acts such as The Clash actively rallied against imperialism in their work. But at the end of it all, so much of the nihilism felt by punks fed back into the general white malaise. The world is f***ed up, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Society stinks.
We were trying to change something. The music industry, the way we live, you know, to be accepted any way we want to, you know.
Why do you wear those clothes like that?
Uncomfortable.
At one time, maybe I was considered different, but now I'm in a comfortable lifestyle and I can be myself.
Going into the 80s, and I want to say the late 70s, we get the new wave of British heavy metal, with bands like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden making huge waves with the denim jeans and jacket fan base. Mid to late 70s also gives us more flamboyant rock acts like Aerosmith and, to my point here, Kiss.
Hey, didn't see you come in. We're just getting into shape for our upcoming tour. We're playing 5 big shows in 5 days. So if you rock and roll.
And because everything was so extra in the 80s, the bright, glammed up androgynous look took over the boys in the bands. This is where we enter the hair metal or crotch rock era. Dominated by Pretty Boys and Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, Van Halen, Motley Crue, it's very interesting that this period of guitar virtuosity upped the level of misogyny exhibited by its leading men. Truly a gross time to be alive. But it sparked a crusty counterculture. Well, I guess a few of them. You've got the Budweiser chugging riff heavy boys in Metallica, paying homage to Black Sabbath, but wanting to engage in that energy with faster riffs and heavier guitar sections. Speed Demon Slayer, as well as other acts that would constitute the thrash metal movement. As well as another wave of punk would consist of hardcore punk bands, i.e. Bad Brains, the Dead Kennedys, Black Flag. I promise I'm trying to get through this as fast as I possibly can. This isn't an exhaustive list, just something for context. All three of these groups, the thrash kids, the hardcore punk crowd, and the hair or glam dudes, all reveled in misogyny and racism to a certain degree. And, to be for real, excluding the hair metal scene, were pretty alienating for femmes and queer folks. Just a bunch of sweaty dudes. Bet it smelled crazy in there. But again, with the exception of the Dead Kennedys, Bad Brains, and maybe Megadeth, these projects and scenes didn't really engage or agitate politically. They definitely had moments though. And ironically enough, the glammed out dude bros and their aggressive misogyny and affluence became that scene's very undoing.
I think heavy metal is the true rock and roll of the 80s. And rock and roll was basically music made by people who were thinking with their crotches.
Punk was getting to be techno. Punk was turning into disco in disguise.
What do you think parents think about you?
Do I care?
The heavy metal bands just picked up on one little thing that we did, you know, I mean, we do that kind of music real well, you know, but this is like this much of what we do, you know, we do a whole bunch of things.
I like that spine-chilling feeling, that goosebumps up the spine, you know, like you really got me. Da-da-da-da. It's like an orgasm.
And this finally brings us to the second subject of the video. We can finally talk about grunge icon Billy Corgan. Hair metal within the mainstream became such an overblown cliche, full of plastic, out-of-touch grown men, high off of inhaling too much hairspray and quaaludes. They literally did all of the quaaludes. Don't look that up. The more rooted, distorted, and raw acts, many of them from Seattle, stemming from scenes cultivated and loosely started by bands like Bam Bam, fronted by Tina Bell, and other groups across the US that blended punk, some Caribbean or European sounds, or just liked some older rock songs. We got Dinosaur Jr., Melvin, Pixies, Sonic Youth, I've been naming bands for way too long. But to the point, these are all the bands that set the groundwork for Nirvana to pop off in the early 90s. Cutting through the faux glam and formulaic songwriting, these new white boys brought a level of vulnerability, tasteful guitar work, and grit back into the rock space. Now we can re-enter Billy Corgan, the frontman of the alt-rock band The Smashing Pumpkins, a band with a decent number of albums I really enjoy. Gish, great. Siamese Dream, one of my favorite rock records. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, very memorable. Adore,
I haven't played it yet.
But Billy is the poster child for a lot of my critiques of the genre that I think contributed to its fall off. With music that is heavy thematically and invites introspection, it seems like a lot of these dudes were like tortured sad boys who kind of found it hard to think outside of themselves. And I know a lot of them struggle with depression and addiction, so I want to be really careful here. But to that point, it in turn kind of wallows in self-pity and solipsistic narcissism to the point that it lacks self-awareness. And I wasn't the only one who kind of noticed this. Let's briefly talk about Billy's strangest beef at the height of his relevance.
What did you think of that song? That was by Pavement. It's called Range Life, the video. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about Pavement, the history of the band, and this is what it was so long ago.
Pavement is an indie band from Stockton, California. While they didn't necessarily reach the commercial heights of the Smashing Pumpkins, they were a pretty important piece of alt-rock history and indie music in the 90s. And now, thankfully, seem to be having a revival of sorts, due to one of their songs going viral on TikTok. But to the point here, the story goes like this. Billy had Pavement kicked off of Lollapalooza 94, allegedly, over some controversial lyrics. In the song Range Life, Stephen Malcolmus, the frontman of Pavement, says this.
Out on tour with the Smashing Pumpkins, Nature Kids. They don't have no function. I don't understand what they mean, and I could really give a fuck.
So just looking at it, it could look like some shade was being thrown Billy's way. Not gonna lie. But if you've heard the song, I'll put the rest of the lyrics up here. It has more to do with Malcolmus and his personal reflections or frustrations with touring and road life. And contrast that with a stable existence and the ability to be in one space. But what made Pavement not as successful as their peers is that I don't really feel that Malcolmus's songwriting leaned into this endless self-indulgent sadness. There was always a level of humor and self-awareness, even at the programmed whiteness or homogeneity the suburb society actually produced. And instead of ruthlessly taking this shit seriously, he kind of made fun of it, making this feud with the dark, tortured Billy Corgan inevitable. I'm biased though. I really like the Smashing Pumpkins, but I generally love Pavement's discography, so grain of salt and all that. But yeah, those bars got Billy's boxers in a bunch, leading to him saying this about the band.
I think it's rooted in jealousy. People don't fall in love with Pavement. They put on Smashing Pumpkins or Hole or Nirvana because these bands actually mean something to them.
This nigga sound like Donald Trump. And though Malcolmus clarified in '99 that it was more a dig against the status within the rock scene, and at the time, not a personal attack on Billy, our bald Fat Joe looking frontman never got over it. With him, I think back in 2022, calling them sellouts for reuniting for Primavera. If you really want to piss off Billy Corgan, maybe catch Pavement on tour this summer. But the 90s were full of this white on white cultural tension. I'm sadly also a Primus fan, and their frontman was too talented and not dumb enough to achieve the same level of notoriety as the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Anthony Kiedis is a creep, and I will not shut up about it. Anyway, the self-indulgent blueprint grunge made would be the rock staple for the coming years. And it kind of turned rock radio into the most boring thing ever. But things were about to get real edgy and offensive, in your face, with the backwards cat maybe.
Say it with me now, Marshall. I just don't give up.
Rock's flirtation with hip-hop has kind of been a staple to those within the rock music sphere who appreciate the contributions of the blues within rock culture, despite how distant it might have seemed from the culture at the time. Be it the Run DMC Aerosmith collab remix of Walk This Way in 1986, in which Aerosmith kind of just used Run DMC to revitalize their careers, or the Public Enemy and Anthrax collab on Bring the Noise 91, which I prefer. And while there were white rappers who acted as more of a commercial gimmick, the collaborative cross-cultural nature of hip-hop aesthetics were also entering the alternative rock scene. Rage Against the Machine being the catalyst for where hard rock would go in the next decade. Kinda. The 90s were kind of loose with this shit. Like, white America was far from being an anti-racist utopia. We can look at the Bush and Clinton admin if you want proof of that. But more so, especially with Gen Xers, there was a weird feeling of being post-racial or hyper-individualistic in a way that allowed for a lot of cultural line crossing. Derogatory. I feel like this decade, with the jam rock scene, birthed the crusty white boys and girls with dreads we are all irritated by now. Speaking of which, the mid-90s also gave us new metal mainstays Korn, as well as genre-defining sounds of Deftones, and again, sadly, Limp Bizkit. I have no hate in my heart for Fred or any of the Limp Bizkit backwards cat boys. I want them to have fun. But with that said, Limp Bizkit is ass. It's like they make Disney Channel villain music or something, but they're allowed to curse. Regardless, they're having somewhat of a cultural resurgence because of nostalgia. My personal feelings aside, Fred Durst, Eminem, Kurt Cobain, and I guess Marilyn Manson provided some of the templates for that kind of dude bro expression at the time. The new edgy subculture creating another passively apolitical but culturally curious type of music listener.
I wear long sleeve shirts under short sleeve shirts under long sleeve shirts.
Wow, oh my God. You're awesome.
Oh my God, you're so cool.
Awesome.
You've checkmated my teenage cynicism.
From there, mainstream rock kind of just took the aesthetics, disaffected attitude, and political posturing of the earlier movement and just became a Jarl fest. Full of bands that sang mostly about nothing. You got Creed, Nickelback, Theory of a Dead Man, Disturbed, Shinedown, Hinder, whole lot of butt rock, with a grating vocal style and songs that got on my goddamn nerves. Also, due to the Telecommunications Acts of '96, lifting the cap on radio station ownership, a lot of rock radio became heavily consolidated. What does that mean exactly? Well, before this law, a wealthy person or corporation could only own a few radio stations at a time. This is what we call antitrust or anti-monopoly type statutes that keep one or a few individuals from owning one industry entirely. So with the lifting of these regulations in the 90s, it gave the green light for a bunch of wealthy folks who probably lobbied in Congress to lift these regulations in the first place to go about buying up their competition, or independent stations that could do honest reporting, popularize marginalized voices, or expand programming for the arts. This is a pre/new internet age, so online culture isn't as ubiquitous or everywhere yet. So a lot of folks found new music through radio play and MTV. The consolidation also had the domino effect of hindering new band discoverability in a big way. MTV was shifting into reality television and only really played top 40s when they showed music videos. Barely. And other channels like Fuse TV or MTV2 were locked behind satellite or premium cable. So a lot of folks got their music from a host of different websites or the radio still. And since independent or niche radio stations were closing down or being bought up, the avenues for new band discovery dropped drastically. And as I mentioned before, since pop punk and other forms of alt-rock thrived with families or kids who had access to premium or satellite cable, who found themselves in these subcultures now became more of a class issue. So in a way, Billy Corgan was kind of right in that there was an effort to move rock outside of its dominant culture. But in reality, it was wealthy white people who were moved regional and hyper-local radio access that caused this issue in the first place. But I know what you're thinking. The act occurred in the mid-90s, and the 2000s were full of incredibly popular rock bands. Don't worry, I got you. Now yes, firmly in the 2000s, pop punk was having a moment. You get the bass variant with the hyper whiny dude bros, Blink-182, Simple Plan, Good Charlotte. They, as I believe, were top 40s artists, who were also receiving heavy radio play, at least on rock radio. Green Day also found themselves on the radio a lot and did an image shift, as they had already been a decade deep at this point, I believe, and were writing more conceptual stuff at the time. Your garden variety goths who were into older music like The Cure, The Damned, Bauhaus, maybe Depeche Mode. Not to be confused with the synthetic goths who listened to cold wave or industrial type of brave music, who also have up dreads like this. There were also the emo scene kids who listened to Fall Out Boy, A Day to Remember, Say Anything, 303.
Set list, you stole off the stage, had red and purple lipstick all over the page.
And then the emo kids that were into Dashboard Confessional, Plain White Tees, Save the Day, and a few others. Now, why am I listing bands again? Well, to illustrate that white America was full of quote-unquote diverse sets of subcultures within music consumption, and at the time, for the most part, excluded racial diversity altogether. And these were all different scenes, audiences, aesthetics, And although they lacked a coherent political framework, to an extent they once again participated in misogyny and racism, with the scene pop punk kids being the worst offenders out of all of them. Like, I am so serious, no one hates women more than your skinny jeaned pop punk frontman. But to my point here, a lot of these different groups didn't really like or interact with each other.
Soon the entire world will be emo. It is our time.
No way.
Nobody understands us, and they won't understand until it is far too late.
Oh my God, no way!
One thing also mentioned about this time is how countercultural it was for Eminem to speak against Bush or the Iraq War, which I feel is a stretch. The Iraq War, especially within music subcultures, was extremely unpopular. One could point to American Idiot by Green Day, with many parts of the live shows lampooning or making fun of the president while using anti-war imagery. There was Rock Against Bush, a 2-volume compilation that included older punk bands like Social Distortion or Bad Religion, mainstream hitters at the time like Foo Fighters, No Doubt, Yellow Card, Sum 41, and obviously Green Day, and my personal favorites Slater-Kinney and Against Me. You could also look at System of a Down, dedicating multiple records to anti-war or Western propaganda messaging. In the heavier realm, there was also Ashes of the Wake by Lamb of God. But the politics didn't go much deeper than that in most places. While this was happening, hip-hop was also expanding. Outkast would reach their mainstream peak during the first half of the decade, and Southern hip-hop would go on to dominate. 50 Cent topped the charts with Modern Male Stoicism, and Kanye West would go on to expand the emotive and productive range during this decade as well, working with pop rock darlings Adam Levine of Maroon 5 and Chris Martin from Coldplay. From the looks of it, hip-hop and its subgenres were beginning to be as varied as its rock counterparts. And sadly, after 2005, Eminem's best music was already behind him. Add to that the collection of legal troubles and addiction issues, and that put him a bit on a hiatus until 09. If we're being real, Encore was kind of stale too. While I feel like at the end of the 90s and beginning of the 2000s, M was a huge counterculture symbol within white America specifically, in an era full of shock jocks, edgy dudes, and aggressive misogyny, his proximity to black folks and comfortability with respecting black culture signaled a self-awareness that may have alienated a lot of young white people who just liked him because he was good at rapping. When, again, at the time, there were safer options. P.O.D., Linkin Park, Papa Roach, and sadly, Limp Bizkit or Hollywood Undead would offer safer spaces for white boys to enjoy hip-hop without directly sharing black adjacent spaces. Still at this time, though, the white person who's really into hip-hop, so much so that he thinks that he's black, was still a shameful stereotype within white culture. It was legit the butt of the joke in a lot of white media.
Yo, I must have died and gone to heaven because I see an angel sitting right in front of me. Are you crying? Oh, no, baby, please. You are far too fine to look so sad.
Ice cream.
Okay.
Everyone has it. And what is the problem with ice cream?
I have no idea.
It drips.
Okay.
So my idea is what?
To make a drip-proof ice cream.
No. Oh, that's the fucking...
Bing!
L to the I to the N to the G. Ling Ling, you forgot your bling bling.
Hey, yo, what's the dealio? Who's your daddy? Back that booty up and put him on the glass.
Sets up in here. We got the Beach Boys, the ACCs, the Abused Children of Celebrity, and this is my crew.
Capping, I be tapping, I be flapping, I be happen. Ning, ding, bing, wing, yo.
Sounds good.
Would, could, should, hood.
Regardless of the person who lived through this decade, there was surprisingly less cross-cultural collaboration between rock and hip-hop. Jay-Z did a collab with Linkin Park, which was fine. The Ludacris Sum 41 collab, which was gas. Or the Punk Goes Crunk compilation that was f***ing garbage.
Armed and dangerous, ain't too many could bang with us. Straight up weed, no angel dust. Label us notorious. Thug that love to bust. It's strange to us, y'all be scrambling, gambling.
But millennial rock wasn't all bad, or steeped in niche subgenres. Straightforward acts like Queen of the Stone Age and Foo Fighters had a great decade. Jack White killed it in the White Stripes and the Raconteurs. Indie and alternative acts did very well. My Morning Jacket, The Strokes, Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Block Party, Arctic Monkeys, TV on the Radio, Interpol, Vampire Weekend, MGMT, LCD Sound System, Spoon, and so many others expanded on the genre and either achieved mainstream success or built a dedicated and evolving indie scene that paved the way for bands in the next decade. So, when did rock fall off? Or to Billy Corgan's assertion, become less influential to modern culture?
the current political system trying to work overtime to get people to become these hyper individual portraits of themselves. And if you are all alone and you feel like you got no one and everyone is your enemy, you're going to be so fucking easy to control.
Yeah.
Because you're going to go paranoid, thinking that everyone's trying to get what you have. And it's like, that's why I feel like people being in touch with their rage and their anger and knowing how to process it is so important.
The quick answer is that it really hasn't. Though bands aren't achieving top 40 status like they used to, acts like Men I Trust, Hiatus Coyote, Black Midi, RIP, Turnstile, Idols, Mannequin Pussy, Sleep Token, Big Thief, and King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard are currently extremely popular. Definitely music discovery has changed drastically with the advent of social media, and a lot of bands post 2010 could communicate directly with their audiences, or use the online music outlets to find their audience. And one would think that this should have made it easier to promote their shows, right? And have access to successful tours. Well, again, the effects of the '96 Telecommunications Act ran very deep. The pop-punk labels counteracted this with a wide and aggressive flyering campaign in the cities that the artists were touring in, using social media that they had at the time and pumping ads on cable networks, as well as low-budget programming. And even though that scene collapsed due to a similar 80s level of androgyny mixed with hyper-misogyny, and if we're being real, outright PDF readers leading most of the bands, they, at the time, were ahead of the curve. The late 2000s and early 2010s brought us the blog era, where everything was aesthetic and you can find a band to be obsessed with if you were actively looking for it, from MySpace to probably Tumblr. From here, it seems like what we refer to as rock music mixed with more genres. Experimental, electronic, pop, so many other things that challenged our internal images of what a rock star looked like. And in terms of this conversation around misogyny within rock music, it didn't help that a lot of the people who were leading this new shift were non-white, queer, or women, and continue to do that currently. I think this is why dudes say that rock has fallen off. It doesn't really center them anymore. But back to the media landscape change. It's a meh but okay kind of situation. On one hand, it's easier to communicate with your audience if you're an artist. But at the same time, oligarchs and billionaires are in leagues with the record label owners who are in the process of hyper-consolidating the industry, buying up indie labels, using bot farms to push their artists on Spotify or other streaming platforms, along with a collection of other nefarious things. So to clarify, there was a ton of great rock music in the past decade, just like there was a ton of good rap, R&B, jazz. But as our economic system continues to funnel money and attention upward, they skipped steps and chose who they wanted to listen to, and just flooded the algo with them in lieu of interesting stuff that you probably like. And it's not a secret nefarious plot, but that's just how capitalism works. It's not about competition, but owning the means of production, i.e. the streaming platforms, the ticket selling sites, and the music venues, so that you can maximize profit while giving the consumer less. It's gotten so ridiculously lopsided that now more than ever, it's hard for even successful established artists to tour and provide a service that they want to provide, and that we, the music consuming public, want to purchase from them. And now would be a good time to talk about the Ticketmaster Live Nation merger. So, in an era in which sustaining a new band or project became less feasible due to the avenues for that ecosystem being shut out by oligarchs, the largest ticket sale and distribution company deciding to merge with its biggest competitor, Live Nation, sounds like a great idea, right? Well, this happened in 2010. Live Nation gets a bigger market share because at the time, Ticketmaster sold, I want to say, 66% of all tickets. In turn, Ticketmaster gets Live Nation's venue share and contracted artists. You pay more to see artists that you like, usually in a larger, shittier venue. It's gotten so bad that they're taking a larger cut of what the artist takes home from every show, with more aggressive ticketing and venue fees. Touring is now leagues harder if you're a musician, and hella expensive if you're a person who just wants to enjoy a show. But we aren't cooked or doomed. There's still many independent local venues where you can see your favorite bands or artists who aren't Taylor Swift or Beyonce. And you can see them for a reasonable price usually. And to be honest, they need you now more than ever. I'm serious, please go to their shows and buy a ticket in advance, because a lot of the time, they can only continue to tour if people are projected to come see them. If attendance is spotty, then indie venues can't really afford to book them again. Let me rein it in though. Bands, be it the Beatles or you or your friends, formed because homies wanted to hang out and be social. Maybe stun on that one drummer who always thought that they were better than you, but still gets 0 gigs. That wasn't personal at all. Art, through this economic system, can always be commodified and used for capital. But connecting with people through songs is one of the most human things that one could do, and experience in a room full of others. The sad truth is, a lack of prevalence in the amount of bands comes from a few things. Instruments are expensive, people are broke, or not home enough to introduce music to their kids. Social spaces have diminished, making space in which we meet people and socialize a lot of the time be these apps, video games, and social media platforms. And even there, culture has become homogenized, with struggle AAVE being the way most young people speak with each other right now.
You finna got that Rory Gilmore posture. Don't be talking. You finna got that. That's not how you use finna. What does Gya even mean? Girl, your ass is thick, that's what it stands for. It means get your act together like when you're staring too much. That's not what either of those mean. It's just like yacht damn, like goddamn.
Music stores continue to close, and arts funding continues to be cut from our schools. But even with that, rock and heavy music is still very much alive. If you want more bands to listen to, check out these platforms. And I'm aware that I, since I've lived through a lot of these changes, have had a very special front row seat to a lot of them. And I've met a lot of other folks with similar experiences. And I'm currently finishing up a documentary about that, where I center the stories of other black punks who have participated in these music communities, found themselves, and had to combat anti-blackness at a time where they might not have had as much support as they do now. And if you want more info about that, or the stuff that I'm working on, consider joining my Patreon. There's a free tier where I share interviews from the videos that I make, a paid tier where I share live performances from when my band tours, early access to videos like this, and your name in the credits like the people who are scrolling by now. But I'll be sending out a newsletter as well as to where you can find a screening of the film once it's finished. Thinking around late spring, early summer. But that's all I got. What do you think? This may have been a longer one, and I'm hoping it makes sense. I don't have much else to say, so I guess that's it. Peace.